Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Cloud Wars Live. The industrial revolution is in full swing, all part of the larger digital revolution. And we've got somebody with us today, one of our monthly guests, who really has a very, very strong insight into both the industrial revolution 4.0 and the ways that the digital revolution is weaving into that. And each of them is sort of pushing the other forward. Tony Uphoff is the CEO of Thomas. Tony, welcome back. Always a pleasure to have you.
Hey, Bob, always be great to be on with you and good to see you, my friend.
Yeah, and I know, Tony, when I started and saying that thing about the Industrial Revolution, it's like, why did this guy fall asleep for a couple hundred years? But it is happening all around us today, right?
You know, it is remarkable, Bob, and we oftentimes talk about this notion of, we tend to think these big events are going to happen far sooner than they actually do. And then we tend to underestimate the ultimate impact of these big events. And if you think of Industry 4.0, it's the combination of so many of the technologies that we talk about on a regular basis being applied into the manufacturing and industrial marketplaces. And it is just amazing to see this taking off right now. And it's, you know, before we went on air, I used the expression of renaissance, resurgence, you know, and there's so many ways we could take that conversation, but as usual, you're watching the advanced series of technologies now start to enable an industry in a way that simply that industry could not adapt before. And it's really exciting to watch it. And it's particularly acute here in North America, Bob, whereas I think a lot of these technologies are having a disproportionate impact on North American manufacturing right now.
Yeah. Hey, Tony, I want to ask you to talk a little bit about one of the big ideas you had come in with today about these tech-driven business models. But as a prelude to that, I know you're very well known to lots of folks, but in case anybody our audience here is growing, talk a little bit up front about the perspective that you're able to offer from what Thomas does, and then talk about some of those things of these really remarkable innovations in business model generation.
Hey, Bob, thanks very much. And I'll see if I can link those actually. So Thomas, for Industry, is now celebrating its 123rd year in business. And today it's a modern data and platform company. Our core platform of thomasnet.com is the leading resource for product sourcing and supplier selection and evaluation. And so every second, an engineer or procurement professional or what's called an MRO, think of someone who might be managing a factory floor for a manufacturer like Boeing or Tesla, is selecting a product or evaluating a supplier on that platform. As a result, we're now up to close to 4 petabytes of ongoing buyer behavior data. It goes back 10 years. So it gives us this remarkable window into the industrial economy. So it gives us a sense, Bob, of not only products and services that are in demand, but by whom and for what purposes. And that gives us some just really fun and exciting insights on trends that are moving in and around the industry. And one of those trends that we're really watching very carefully, Bob, and we can certainly see it in the industrial marketplace, is we're starting to see a pretty dramatic acceleration of what we think of as tech-enabled business models. You know, our mutual friend, Sean Amirati, you know, if I use the expression digital transformation, he kind of, you know, oh, Tony, come on, digital transformation, that's passé. It's now about business model transformation. And he's right. What his real point there is, you know, these investments, the time, the learning, the data, the information we're getting and gleaning from ongoing digital transformation should enable something. And I think what we're now seeing is a series of tech-enabled business models, Bob, that are really, really exciting. And, you know, maybe I'd throw out one or two here that your listeners could relate to. So if you think of some obvious ones that we sometimes turn to in the consumer marketplace, you think of something like streaming, which we've talked about before. The technology is not new. And the idea of a subscription service is not new, but putting those two together is still relatively new. You know, we really, you know, first started to think of this and hear about it back in 2007. Streaming technology had been around since the 1990s. 2007, Netflix started to really commercialize the concept. And back then people thought, well, is this really going to go anywhere? Boy, they're not debating that today. And you're seeing major, what we think of as broadcast networks, issue $3 billion of equity to start to invest. That's CBS Viacom that's just announced that, because they need to keep up and keep pace in the what we now call the streaming wars, like the cloud wars that you regularly cover. I think the other one, Bob, that I would mention, which I think is equally fascinating, the professor Scott Galloway refers to this as rundles. And what he means by rundles are recurring revenue bundles. And boy, are we watching this just come almost out of nowhere, where, before we would think of, frankly, kind of confusing companies like AT&T and Verizon as sort of a mishmash of different products. And all of a sudden you're like, whoa, wait a minute. They're bundling these together and it's becoming all recurring revenue. So long way from what does Thomas do and how does Thomas fit? How do we glean the insights? But I think this idea, and we're an example of it, Bob, to a great extent, where these newer or more advanced uses of digital technology are enabling our business today and allowing us to step into businesses we weren't in yesterday.
Yeah, you're out on the front edge of that, right, Tony? So some of these things that you've talked about before, like the and lots of folks have heard about it, but these shortages that are holding up the production of things like cars, right? You think, oh, there's not enough metal, there's not enough paint, there's not, the right sort of material for the seats, whatever, but it's electronics, right?
It really is, Bob. And one of the things, and you and I have talked about this, one of the things that we're tracking is, because our data gives us a glimpse into what's been sourced, but also what is being sourced, we can start to make some generalized, I'll call them predictions about what's moving. And one of the things that we're really focused on for the second quarter of this year is we think demand for PCB boards is going to rise by 17 to 20%, which in a mature category is a lot. That's not a category that's new. But what is new is exactly to your point. As the world starts to change a little bit, the range of, let me call it, products or services that would use PCB boards has broadened, and particularly broadened in the transportation, industry. These, as you and I have talked before, are sort of rolling computers. And what it's actually doing is creating a massive amount of demand, but also a shortage. So some of the major auto companies have had to actually say, hey, we may not hit our 21 production schedule because we can't get PCB boards or get enough of them, which seems, if we'd gone back 5 years and said that, we would have kind of laughed at it. But today, a car has become a computer, and it's kind of remarkable to see some of the trickle down effects of that.
Yeah, Tony, just as you were talking about that, I had to go back. It wasn't all that long ago, right? That I believe it was Ford Motor in the Detroit area that built the River Rouge plant, right? It was almost a mile long. And, raw materials came in the front and a finished car came out the others. Well, they'd have to have fabs now, right? For these new electronic parts.
It's really confusing. You look at Apple's recent, decisions that they're going through, and there's been some confusion from the media's point of view of understanding, is Apple actually going to build a car? Are they going to license technology to a car company? Or are they going to do that with more than one car company? Do they maybe just work with a chassis manufacturer? We live in just fascinating times, and it kind of cuts to the theme of what we're talking about, Bob, which is, technology is now enabling really unique and different business models. Yeah. So the idea that a computer company could be a car company and a car company could be a computer company is not a reach today. It's a reality. It's just a matter of how imaginative can we be around the business model. We never thought of cars as subscription services based on technology, but that's indeed what they are today. And we never thought of, an Apple computer company that one day we might be driving one physically or having it drive us, depending on how you want to look at the evolution of technology. But I think this enablement of new business ideas through technology, again, Bob, what you and I are describing isn't new. I think it's starting to be applied in areas that that aren't just digital, if that makes sense. And it kind of cuts to the manufacturing. So we're able to think of, oh, wait a second, we can apply these technologies in deeply physical work and products and services that we heretofore wouldn't have thought of as different business models or ideating of them as a service type of models.
Yeah, Tony, just one example of that I think this is, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, but it was BMW had offered this new program. They said, for people, you don't want to buy a car, we get that. So here's a leasing program. And they had, I think, 3 tiers. And if you went to the highest, each of the tiers, you had options, right? If during the week you want to have your coupe to drive to work, great. And on the weekend, you want the SUV for more family-oriented things, you can have that. But, it eliminated the need for ownership to go through things like insurance and maintenance and car registration, license, all that stuff that, maybe some people find to be real interesting and fun, but probably most don't. And then the tiers up, I think at the highest level, you could, day to day, you could go in and switch out your BMW vehicle based on what it was that you wanted to do that day. So the flexibility of that. And then I'm sure I saw at a car wash the other day, they had a sign up that said, buy this, gold program and you get unlimited car washes for, however long. So yeah, we're seeing these business model changes. And you said, Tony, some of them are deeply, enmeshed in technology, and others of them I think are just catering to people's notion. Like, what was it, Harry's Shaving Club? I don't want to buy razors anymore, so they'll send them to you. And what, didn't P&G bought them for $3 billion?
Yeah.
So
Well,
there's money out there.
It is fascinating because if you think about what's underneath this, right, Bob, it's tech is enabling it. We've said that over and over, but it's also now starting to shift the way people think about. There's another adage that you hear repeated a lot today, is that every company is an audience company today. Right. And if you think about what, the Dollar Shave Club had to do, is they had to create an audience first before they could take that step. So the technology enabled the ability to create a subscription business out of razors. But at the same point in time, they had to start to think about that difference very differently, as opposed to, my job is to drive you into a retail outlet to buy my brand of razor. I have to create an audience and engage an audience. And I think that's a trend as well, Bob, that's underneath these shifting business models. We can see this in the manufacturing industry, where the idea of an ongoing service with a customer versus a project with a customer. A lot of people in manufacturing headhunt projects. Projects can have a begin and an end date, but through the magic of some of these technologies and the kinds of things you and I are describing, a lot of companies are now starting to look at, how might I turn this into a recurring revenue service or an ongoing service that has a deeper customization and value for the customer, but also a more stable, right, and more consistent revenue that you can invest in on the part of the supplier.
Well, Tony, I know you also have some thoughts you want to share about these again, additional innovations in manufacturing, sort of wrapped around this Buy American Act. We'll come to those in just a second, but first I just wanted to offer a word from our sponsor, BMC. BMC wants to know, is your business on its A game? That's when systems are intelligent by learning from markets, where automation is paramount yet effortless, and when technology and people work as one in an enterprise. The A game is your business at its absolute best. BMC calls this the autonomous digital enterprise. Find out more at bmc.com/agame. So Tony, with a lot of this, you talk about some things having to do with skills gap, other things, but reshoring. What's happening with this? And do you see this trend accelerating, Tony?
Well, it is, it is remarkable to see what's happening. This idea, as we've talked about before, and for some of your listeners who might not be familiar with the term, reshoring is exactly what it sounds like. It is the reshoring of manufacturing back to, whatever domestic means in that context, right? So in this case, we're following this from a North American point of view. that movement has been happening for the better part of a decade, Bob, and slowly accelerating, if I can use those terms together, over the course of that decade as companies, through primarily advanced manufacturing technology, many North American companies became much more competitive on the global stage. There's also been a reevaluation of the actual mathematics underneath the value of offshoring. And I think in some cases, myself and others have debunked some of the original math that suggested if we can get this component for $1 somewhere and it costs us $3 to make, it's better to outsource it. Well, shipping the dollar component and dealing with the tariffs and regulations, by the time I get it in, I now actually realize it cost me $3.25, and perhaps I shouldn't have outsourced it to begin with. So I think there's two things happening there. I think one is a reassessment of that, a much more advanced technological infrastructure in US manufacturing in particular. But the third piece too is also the ability to locate some of these more nimble manufacturing facilities near clusters of customers. So when you run the math on all of that, reshoring is without question accelerating. We took a significant jump, Bob, during the pandemic. And some of this was based on just the remarkable disruption to supply chains and companies realizing, I can't afford this. I cannot afford to have that kind of disruption. Other companies realizing I can take advantage of a disruption and I can fulfill a need. So I think both are accurate and true. The United States government is very focused right now on accelerating this phenomenon and helping to, I was going to say bring back, but I think it's coming back very quickly, but to make sure that U.S. manufacturing retains its strength. And so you and your listeners have likely heard about the Buy American Act. There's a subset of that called the Berry Amendment. And what it basically does is strongly encourage companies to retain manufacturing here or bring it back to the United States. And that has resulted in a whole new level, as we can see in sourcing. So if you go on to thomasnet.com, you can now see a Buy American Act filter so that buyers can make sure they can locate the companies that would qualify under the program and help. And so my long-winded answer to your very simple question is, it is indeed, reshoring is indeed happening. I think it is accelerating. I also think you're going to see a continued reimagining of manufacturing here in the United States. And by that, I simply mean it's really the impact of the technologies that you and I keep talking about, Bob, that's allowing for that. But also, to the earlier part of our conversation, the reimagining of business models, being more nimble, flexible, trying different things that I think will allow U.S. manufacturing to not just take a one-time advantage of a couple of year acceleration of reshoring. I think this will really be a sustained phenomenon and a very healthy one. And by the way, as I say this, global manufacturing is not going to go anywhere. All this really means is that you're going to see a lot of movement between the major economic powers. China is not going anywhere as a manufacturing power. And the United States keeping pace there is good for both countries, because China is a huge consumer of products and services that are made here in the United States. We will always be consumers of products and services that are made in China. It is very good for the global economy when the United States can accelerate their position as a major manufacturing country.
Well, Tony, I really like that the one idea you expressed there about the opposite of the example I mentioned a few minutes ago about Ford and the River Rouge plant, right? 1 mile long giant plant, raw materials come in, finished thing comes out on the other end. You talked about some companies putting a manufacturing facility, production facility around where there's a cluster of customers, and that other businesses, not material intensive businesses, have been able to do that sort of thing. But it's interesting now, as you're saying, that technology and other new business models and the reimaginations you mentioned are allowing now manufacturing and industrial companies to do exactly that sort of thing. And
It,
that's
it's
got to be a,
inc-
yeah.
it's incredible, Bob. And for people that aren't around manufacturing businesses, many of us work in what you and I would consider to be knowledge work, software related, where our work is into and output from a computer. When you go to see some of these facilities, it kind of blows your mind. And again, it's the underlying enabling technologies. Several years ago, we started to spot in our data sourcing for small warehouse facilities, literally as in the building of small footprint warehouses. We thought, what the heck would be possibly be going on? And we realized we had stumbled into the acceleration of this phenomenon. But if you think about it, there's an incredible logic to it. In its own way, it's no different than what you see with Amazon, having, distribution centers around the country. Walmart stays competitive. Certainly, they've gotten very good at e-commerce, but they have 2,400 distribution centers around the country that are close to pockets of customers. So in its own way, it's similar to that. What's changed, Bob, is it used to be, you used to have this massive facility, to your point, to manufacture the product. Today, with advanced technology, and particularly now starting to see the influence of things like additive manufacturing, you can have a much more efficient, smaller footprint facility. And you can also now, because of some of the quality of the manufacturing going on, you can locate this in areas that your original production might not have been able to for either regulatory reasons or environmental reasons, where you can now locate these in areas and just open things up. Last connected point I'd make to it, Bob, we're actually seeing a fairly brisk movement of companies locating 3D printing or additive manufacturing, as it's called, in customers' facilities. So, which is a really slick step in the direction you and I are describing, and obviously opens up on, whether you want to call that just in time or manufacturing on demand, manufacturing as a service. People are calling it a range of different things. But I think it cuts to this theme you and I are touching on is, if we go back through history, we see these cycles where new technologies come and it takes a little while before they really start to be harnessed in ways that are truly transformational. Initially, they're just efficiency plays or some basic improvement on what came before it. We're starting to see in manufacturing just a remarkable era of innovation. And I would say from our vantage point, Bob, we think we're only in the first inning of this. This is just beginning to really play out.
Yeah. Well, Tony, if I could, I know one of the other things we just wanted to touch on here as, the great innovative business models, great, leveraging of supply chains and so forth that's going on there to enable these new sorts of innovations that you've described in industrial markets. But I think it's also interesting to see in parallel, right? Some of the biggest software companies in the world are now starting to realize, hey, these relatively horizontal line of business applications that have been the backbone of the software industry for a long time, they're still important, but they're not enough. They are not equipped to deal with these industry specific clusters of innovation, these reimagined business models and so on. So I do think it's fascinating that Salesforce, Microsoft, SAP, Oracle, and certainly some others are now diving deeply into this sort of industry specific applications, and manufacturing is right at or near the top of all their priorities.
Yeah, it's interesting. You and I were talking a little bit before we went on air about, is this a rediscovery of manufacturing? Is this the dynamic that manufacturing has clearly entered a phase where it's being reimagined and redefined, and in terms that we can relate to growing, as a lucrative sector? I really don't know. I get regular reach outs from very, very lucrative private equity firms that are starting to quietly either invest in or acquire software companies, particularly in and around manufacturing applications and things like that. And they're very curious about our data and perspective. but I think it kind of makes sense, doesn't it, Bob? Right?
Yeah.
If you look at this, if you're a horizontal player like all the names you just listed, at some point you got to understand that your entry into a marketplace needs to be vertical in your go-to-market approach to it.
Yeah.
Right? The
Yeah.
technology is not going to change fundamentally, but you do need to have domain expertise and understanding of stepping into the market. So if I was someone at Salesforce and dealing with you and you were a decision maker at a manufacturing company, your terminology, your language, your nomenclature, your business model, if I didn't understand that, I'm just schlepping a piece of software,
Yeah.
and the odds that I'm going to be successful are pretty slim. So it doesn't surprise me that that's now starting to happen. But I do think, I'm struggling to find a better term than renaissance. I think it's fascinating to see, manufacturing's hot again,
Yeah.
in this country. And I think, I love it because, I joined Thomas 4 years ago with the idea that I think this is going to get white hot again in this country. And thankfully it did.
Yeah.
But it's really fun to be able to see this industry, go through this redefining phase that I think is attracting a lot of very appropriate and positive attention.
Yeah, Tony, and I know from these big software companies, right? They're sitting around, they're looking at, intense, just absolutely savage competition within that sector, and which is, just a wonderful thing because, as good as each one of them gets moving forward, the other's going to have to add to that, and then it's like, okay, then how do you tie in analytics with that? How do you tie in, you know, data management tools, the traditional kind, but in the new ways with the AI and ML capabilities that are going to offer things that could happen before. And, I know it's things like inventory replenishment and supply planning and all is not new stuff, but the power that's going to be put into these things now with these new types of applications is stunning. So your small warehouses and manufacturing clusters in different places and the abilities of companies to, I love what you said about they embed their manufacturing capabilities perhaps within a customer location, but they're going to have that level of precise knowledge and insight and predictive abilities to be able to do that with a lower risk and then higher value for the customer. So renaissance, restructuring, maybe it's starts with the manufacturing reimagination. It's real and it's pretty wild.
Yeah, yeah. No, and it's fun to see it happen, Bob. And I think what is, the reason it makes it for a great story as well, the narrative of it is I find that for a lot of people, while they don't understand much about the modern manufacturing industry, unless you're directly involved in it, everybody has a sense of it,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
primarily because they can relate to the output.
Yeah.
Most everybody has a car. Most everybody, has products and services that when you get them thinking about it, they realize, oh, this computer that I'm talking to you on actually came out of one of those manufacturing facilities. And
Yeah.
somebody had to, source the steel, and they had to source the glass, and they had to put it together, and they had to get the PCB boards and the chips and the components and, manufacture these products and services. And so I think as our imagination starts to have its way with the modern manufacturing industry, I think for the average consumer, what I'm hoping also happens is they start to see the industry for what it really is today versus perhaps a dated point of
Yes.
view of that black and white 1935 photograph of a manufacturing facility, but understand that today, boy, it's a high tech, technology rich, software oriented world that I think a lot of people would find very, very exciting.
Yeah, Tony, if I could offer just, two quick examples of that from where I live here in Pittsburgh. I think it was about 110 years ago, but the journalist H.L. Mencken referred to Pittsburgh as hell with the lid torn off. And a lot of stuff
Wow.
was getting made here, and it was a pretty
Yeah.
grim place, at those times. And then one of the things we see in this neighborhood, we live not far from Carnegie Mellon University, and a lot of the stuff they're doing there with robotics and AI and machine learning. But a couple of the car companies have their driverless car operations around here. So we regularly see these things with those crazy sensors and all that technology up on the roof of these things. So this turning, this reimagination of things, this renaissance. It's extraordinary, and to see it happening uh, around the country, around the world, those interlinkages, as you described, across the globe, but that there is this chance within the United States. And I would think, Tony, it's one of those things too that, some of the great young talent and these incredible minds, people coming out and, with data science and machine learning degrees and, those sorts of ideas, that they're going to be drawn to that and say, can I be the person who creates the next this, or whatever
Yeah.
it was that was never done before, especially as you said, like you get Tesla becomes even better known, you get Apple perhaps in some ways being involved in the transportation or mobility business. So it's just a wild new future coming up.
Well, I think, Bob, and you just said it better than I did. It's one of the reasons that I think this redefining the manufacturing industry is really so important for the manufacturing industry, because look, we all compete for talent at the end of the day. And if we can't help the next generation of talent see the opportunity in the markets we're in, we're doomed. I mean, it really is a huge challenge. So the skills shortage is very real in manufacturing everywhere, but certainly in North America. And I think, today, that redefining of what a manufacturer is, people in their minds don't think of Apple as a manufacturing company. They don't think of Microsoft as a manufacturing company. They don't think of Amazon as a manufacturing company. But if you really climb up underneath what they're doing, they are as much of a manufacturer as many other companies that you would think of as much more traditional manufacturers. And I think that's a great thing to get out there, because as young people particularly start to think about, and imagine what their future might look like, I think what manufacturing provides for them that some other technology-rich industries do not, which is the I guess what I'd call it, Bob, is almost the combination of the maker movement. You're actually making something. I always, I'm sure I've used it with you. I always use that joke of, you're heading home on the subway on Friday and you're thinking to yourself, man, can't wait to get home to tell everybody about this spreadsheet that I built this week. It's a killer. This thing was fantastic. It had macros and all kinds of pivots, and oh my God, it was incredible. Versus, hey, take a look at this. I actually built this. Or look at that car. My components that I build go in that car. And, I'm having fun with the conversation, obviously, Bob, but I think there's something to that that's not just generational. We can all relate to that. But we believe, at least, we're seeing in the millennial generation that's now in the decision-making body inside most every company out there, maybe is reaching for that more so than the generation ahead of them was. That they want that satisfaction of, I produced something, or I'm a part of the production of something, versus I'm passing paper back and forth, or I'm just simply transitioning knowledge back and forth. And I'm intentionally making that sound negative. I don't mean to, but I think there's something that you and I are describing here that we don't completely understand, that may be innate in us, that we want to produce things. And if we can now combine those, can we combine knowledge work and the production of a good, right? Wow, isn't that a satisfactory vocation, and perhaps one that could be incredibly attractive to young people?
Yeah. No, Tony, is beautifully said. And I do want to, wrap up here. I think it's industrial revolution. You can put a number on it, 4.0, 5.0, 12.0, whatever it is. That is happening. And it is always wonderful, Tony, to get your perspectives on this, because I think with your backgrounds in a number of fields, even bringing up that point today about how every company has to be an audience company first, right? There's so much going on in these different entry points. It's been wonderful as always, Tony. And thank you so much for sharing some of Thomas Nett's insights on that, and your own perspectives on where things are headed.
Hey, Bob, thanks. Always a blast to be on the show, and look forward to seeing you soon.
All right. Thanks, Tony. And thanks to all of you for being with us here at Cloud Wars Live. There's lots going on in the world today. It is also, we're a couple days into springtime. So For us in the Northeast, this is wonderful. We've gotten to the end of what seemed to be an endless winter. Good days ahead for everybody. Thank you so much for being with us.